Welcome into Citizen Sports Talk. I'm Caden Reinhard, Jacob Smith here, and we're down here at Citizens, right after the Floyd County and Radford game. But first off, you had the chance to go down to the Carroll County game this week. You want to start us off with your thoughts after that game?
Yeah, I thought it was a great, complete win from the Carroll County Cavaliers. This was a big conversation. Me and Mike Myers went down last night to call the game. 3 straight wins for the Cavaliers coming off their bye week. They've won 6 of their last 7 to put themselves in a good position to potentially host a home playoff game. They really need to get the win next week against James River at home, which will have the NFHS coverage of that next week. We'll have a crew down there to cover that one. But as of right now, they might need some help to get a top 4 spot. But I'll dive into that in a second. But looking at the game itself, Martinsville did a good job early staying in the game. And, a couple big plays by the Bulldogs offense kind of, kept it closer than maybe it should have been if you, kind of watching the game and just the pacing of it. It felt like Carroll County really had their control of it fairly early. They had a fumble late in the first quarter, I believe, and, that kind of built some momentum for the Bulldogs. But really, start of the second quarter, or about halfway through the second quarter, rather, it really became all Carroll County. They scored about 30 unanswered points, kind of similar to what we saw tonight with the Buffaloes and Bobcats game, but we'll go deeper into that later. But, yeah, I thought it was a great win. I thought it was, a statement win. Coming off the last 2 games, they beat Floyd County on the road 2 weeks ago, and they beat Radford on the road last week. I think, beating down on a pretty weak Martinsville team kind of was another statement win. Their third win in a row after their bye week, looking to make it 4 straight going into the playoffs. And I had a chance to talk to Coach Greer for the Cavaliers after the game. Here was his thoughts on the win over the Bulldogs.
All right, so joining me, the winning coach once again, 3 in a row coming off since your bye week. Coach Greer, you've scored over 150 points in your last 3 games. What does that say about your offense so far in the last 3 weeks?
We're just getting more disciplined. And the kids, we've talked about this before, we're trying to get good at a few things, and we're slowly getting better at it. And I think the better, we can get at those few things, it just equates. Late in the year when it's cold and sloppy and nasty too, I think it's running the football is crucial, and that's what we're built to do. So I think that's just some of it. We're getting late in the year, and people are dinged up and banged up, and what we do is hard to defend on that end. So I think it just helps us some.
We talked about it a little bit during the game, like the short weeks, having guys banged up 2 weeks in a row. 1, the preparation, having to go 2 short weeks back to back, and 2, have your guys been able to stay healthy and keep fighting through the shorter weeks?
They're tough, and also we have a tremendous athletic trainer, and his goal is getting guys back on the field. I won't lie, I'm tired of the short weeks. We don't defensively, it's a nightmare because the teams we faced have had electric athletes and lining up, just getting lineups, and so you're kind of stuck in the conundrum of what fundamental work do I trim out to work on team periods, or or do we want to work fundamentals then have an alignment issue? So we're looking really forward to a full week of practice where we don't feel so rushed.
So we were kind of talking about it. What has been the big difference during the week outside of the preparation? What do you have to do from 4 days to 3 days that's made such a big difference?
You condense, you are trying to throw so much more information at guys early in the week, and as you test it through the week to see what you like and don't like, especially defensively, those adjustments have to be fast, and the guys don't get as many reps, and football is all about repetition. Specialty, you have to stay way basic with your special teams. You don't get the reps on that. Or if you want to spend more time on your special teams, what are you going to take time away from? And you don't want to keep your kids here all night neither, because you can't punish them because it's a short week. So I think it's a coaching decision of what do you want to take away from to get the full work in on what's what becomes more important. So for us, defensively and defensive alignments, we felt like were more important, because offensively we're going to do what we do.
And you've been doing that so far the last 3 weeks. One last question. You get the Friday off, the Halloween off. Any special plans for Halloween?
For the first time in a long time, Jake, I'm going to take my kids trick or treat that I haven't been at football practice. So I'm going to take my kids trick or treat, then I'm going to go home. I'm going to turn on NFHS and watch a really good football game between Floyd County and Radford. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to eat my kids' Halloween candy and watch football on TV, and that's probably my plans.
I was getting ready to say, I guess you'll be listening to me for a few
I
more
will,
hours
yes,
on
sir.
Friday.
Yes, sir. That works for me.
All right,
So,
thanks, Coach.
Y'all do a great job. Good to see you, Jake.
Yeah, good to see
See
you,
you, man.
Coach.
So, talking, about the Cavaliers game, looking at the playoff picture for region or Class 3 Region D, Magna Vista stays as the 1 seed, pretty much solidified it at this point. They're 9-0 this year. The 2 seed, and we talked about this before we started, Caden, the margin between the 2 seed all the way down to the 5 seed is pretty tight. And then right there at the 6 is it's a span of about 10 total points. It's about a point ranking difference. So with 215 points, Lord Botetourt, despite losing tonight, stays as the 2 seed. Also losing is the 3 seed, William Byrd, with 213. The 4 seed, coming out of the blue off a big win tonight against, I believe, Stanton River. Northside moves up to 4 with 211. Carroll County has 210, so they're 5. 2 through 5 are right there with each other. It feels like if things went the right way, Carroll County's sitting at 5 right now, according to my math. Could jump all the way up to the 2. It could happen, possibly. I think William Byrd and William Byrd plays Stanton River. Northside and Lord Botetourt play each other, so that may help things out as well. But the Cavaliers really need to get it started with a win against James River, like I said, in order for this to be a possible situation where they get another game at home. They're kind of similar situation to the Buffaloes. Get to end the regular season with 2 straight at home and possibly get a 3rd consecutive home game in the regional quarterfinal. Looking further down the regional playoff picture, if you will, the 6th seed with 206 is Bassett. They were on a bye week this week, so definitely had things evened out. Now that most of these teams, aside from Cave Spring, have all played 9 games. Cave Spring has played 10, so their bye is next week. The 7th seed is Abington, coming off a loss against an undefeated Union team tonight. And then the 8th seed is Cave Spring right now, slightly ahead of Stanton River. So again, that Stanton River William Byrd game will be big for 3A next week, or Class 3 Region D next week. Rounding out the rest of the region, like I said, Stanton River's at 9. 10 is Tunstall. 11, Pulaski County. 12, Christiansburg. And at the bottom at 13, unlucky 13 in this situation, Hidden Valley. They're currently winless in the region as well. So that kind of encapsulated, I guess, what the playoff picture is looking like. Very competitive field, as the point system at least shows.
Yeah, it's kind of that point where for all these teams, the playoff spot's there. That's not what it's worrying about. It's giving one more Friday Night Lights for those fans just to cheer them on. And, kind of Coach Cromer said it in the coaches show this week that he doesn't know how much the home crowd truly affects it, but I don't know. Those fans, once it gets playoff time and they truly realize that might be the last Friday Night Lights for 230-some days, I think that home field advantage will truly come out for these teams.
Yeah, and that's kind of what they're playing for, is the home field. Like I said, Magna Vista is pretty much, I would say, locked up the 1 seed for the region. But, the rest of these teams, we could have, if things went the right way, we could have Lord Botetourt sitting at 2, playing Northside next week, drop all the way down to 5 or 6. It's that close and that competitive. And it's going to be interesting to keep up with getting ready for next week or 2 weeks from now. And like I said, we might get a Carroll County playoff game in our inaugural season covering the Cavaliers football. But talking a little bit about, we'll go ahead and transition into the Buffaloes football game. Taking on the Radford Bobcats, Caden, it was a back and forth game. what did we say, 5 lead changes or something like that pretty early in the first quarter, late in the second quarter. And then really that turnover on downs that the Buffaloes had really shifted all the momentum in favor of the Bobcats. They were able to get stops defensively. They were able to have a run game that I had not seen on film at all this year. So definitely a big win for the Bobcats. And the Buffaloes kind of, I would say solidified their position for the playoffs at the 3 seed, which we'll go into that real quick after you give your thoughts on the loss for the Buffaloes tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really encapsulated it nicely by saying that, 5 lead changes early, and then really the Bobcats just took off with it. I think the key for the Bobcats tonight, you mentioned the rush. I think it was really a mix of the rush and the passing game. It was really balanced, I thought. I mean, their pass plays were deep, sending, streaks out there just about every play. Even if it was a run, they'd have a lot of kind of misdirection, wasting those cornerbacks' energy, just getting them to run downfield, lock eyes with you, doing anything they kind of can to be pesky. And it worked out all night because eventually you start watching the run so much, they pass, and then it's a big touchdown. You start watching the pass, they're going to run down your throat, and they did it efficiently tonight.
Yeah, I will say we had a lot more quarterback scrambles from Radford than I was expecting. A more pocket passer. From what I had seen, he was forced to make plays, and he was able to make those plays both on the ground and in the air. Had a lot of touchdown. One big passing touchdown to start the game. Pace Prelude with a rushing touchdown. Parker Dobbins with the rushing touchdown. A big passing touchdown to Trenton Carter. Dobbins with another rushing touchdown, and D. Hart Lewis with the rushing touchdown that kind of sealed the game in terms of scoring. But like you said, really balanced. I was expecting, maybe the Radford of the traditional Radford, a more spread out team, slinging the rock all around, trying to find all these open receivers, and I was surprised by how much the passing attempts were involved within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. A lot of curl routes, a lot of screen routes, or screen plays rather, that kind of set the tone late in the first half and the second half altogether, that the Buffaloes couldn't stop, and the Bobcats came away with a win to guarantee at least a 500 record. But looking at the playoff picture for those curious, a lot of things, I think there was a lot of dust. There was a dust cloud building up. I'll use that analogy for this week. There was 2 games in particular that had a lot of implications for the playoff picture at hand. And I think with the results of those games going the way they did, I think a lot of things at the top of the region got settled tonight. So looking at the Class 2 Region C playoff picture, Glenver got to kind of sit on the couch and watch everything play out in front of them. I believe they are solidified as the 1 seed unless they lose to the Buffaloes next week and Gretna takes down Alta Vista possibly. But maybe that would definitely have to be – it would have to go out exactly like I said. Glenver lose, Gretna win in order for Glenver to lose out on that 1 seed. I would like to say Gretna Appomattox was the other big game we were having to watch tonight. Appomattox at 4, Gretna at 2. Gretna scored 30 unanswered points after Appomattox had the 22-0 lead late in the first half. Gretna came away with the win. They pretty much locked up a top 2 spot. And with the Buffaloes losing, there's a big enough gap between them and the Bobcats at 3. I believe regardless of what happens next week for the Buffaloes against the Highlanders, they're locked in as the 3 seed. I don't think Martinsville can really, Radford has enough to do to make that jump. They're not going to hardly get anything out of the Martinsville win next week. It'll be, if they win, it's only going to be 20 points, 18 for the win, and only 2 rider points since Martinsville's only won 1 game. And the Buffaloes get 15 points or 16 points rather, if they just show up. And if they were to lose to the Highlanders, 6 to the loss and 10 points or 10 rider points with the Glenver going undefeated if they did beat the Buffaloes next week. Like I said, Radford's the 4 with the win tonight. They leapfrog Appomattox. That's been a little bit of leapfrog between the Raiders and the Bobcats at 4 and 5. I believe Appomattox is pretty much stuck at 4. They play Nelson County next week. James River, who the Buffaloes beat last week, is at 6. They play, like I mentioned earlier, at Carroll County next Friday. That'll be a telling sign, I believe, that we may get a James River Floyd County rematch in the regional quarterfinal, just kind of the way things have worked out. Nelson County is at 7. Dan River moves up to 8 off the bye week as Patrick County lost to James River tonight. So Patrick County, I believe, given the fact that they have their bye week tonight, Dan River will have to beat Chatham more than likely to get in. So that'll be an interesting way to watch and see how things play out there. Definitely a close 7, 8, 9 there. And then looking on the outside, Liberty at 10, Martinsville at 11, and Chatham at the bottom of the region at 12. So that'll definitely make things interesting with Dan River. That Dan River game for the 8 seed, probably going to be traveling to Glenver or Gretna, depending on how things go out. A lot of speculation right now, but I'd like to say for the most part, unless things go the way that that would kind of shock the local football, power rankings, or however you want to describe it, the level of power, if you will. I think, like I said, Gretna, they're going to have to expect a Glenver loss next week to the Buffaloes in order to have a chance of the 1 seed. So it'll definitely be interesting. If you have any thoughts off the playoff picture.
I think, again, it's just going to somehow come down to these, last games. A little bit different than we anticipated. We kind of maybe hoped for an undefeated matchup between the Buffaloes and the Highlanders, but instead it looks like the Buffaloes are going to be fighting for a 2 seed.
Or they're fighting for the 3 seed, right? I think you were right. We were kind of anticipating, like, if it went out the way it did tonight, it could have been, if Floyd County won and Gretna lost, Floyd County would have leapfrogged Gretna for the 2 seed in the region. Obviously not the case anymore. So, and like I said, there's enough of a gap. I would like to go ahead. I think we can go ahead and pencil in Floyd as the 3 seed pretty easily right now. Maybe you could write it in an erasable pen or something like that. But I feel like 9, of course, I can say this. I mean, this is pretty accurate given 9 of 10 games for most teams have been played. 90% of the playoff standings have been filled out because, we're 9 of 10 games in. Didn't mean to say it like that, but, we got 1 more week left. I think there's a lot that's been decided already that really can't change given the next week and, who's the teams and who they're playing. But it will definitely be interesting. I'm excited to see, the Highlanders in person next week when they take on the Buffaloes. But looking at some other events, the cross-country team just made it to regions earlier on Tuesday. We talked to Mr. Moran before, during the football game actually tonight around halftime, and according to Mr. Moran, the girls won first place at the regional meet on Tuesday. Boys got second. Both teams will compete at states on November 8th at Greenhill Park in Salem. So not too far for them to go to the state meet this year. For all region, Annika Beagle had first place personal performance. Reagan Lynch had 4th. Natalie Dalton had 8th. and Tracy Lewis had 4th place as well. So definitely a good performance for the cross-country team at regionals this week. And then talking about Cavaliers volleyball, we haven't really talked about it too much here on the show so far, but I'm sure you'll highlight this when you go over the next week's events. They travel to Abington for the regional quarterfinal. They're the 7 seed in Class 3 Region D for the volleyball tournament. So we'll have to see how that plays out and if they are going to be regional champs come the end of next week. But if you want to go ahead and give us the weekly rundown, I believe that's all we have. After that, we'll be signing off for the night.
Yes, we'll start with the Cavaliers on Monday. Middle school boys and girls basketball traveling to Christiansburg, take on the Blue Demons there. And then volleyball, of course, like you just mentioned, traveling down near Bristol to take on Abingdon. Wednesday, the 5th, middle school boys and girls basketball staying at home now, taking on Fort Chiswell. And then on Thursday, the day after, they have another home match against Galax, both boys and girls again. While that's happening in the gym, JV football is going to be traveling all the way down to Buchanan, taking on James River. And then Friday, a week from today, we've already highlighted it, the Cavaliers taking on James River themselves at home. So then going towards the Buffaloes, they start their action this week on Tuesday. Boys and girls middle school basketball traveling to Radford to take on Dalton Intermediate. And a couple matches there. Wednesday, the day after, hosting the Glenver Highlanders. Thursday, football going to be traveling to Glenver to take on the Highlanders JV. And then kind of ending that trifecta of Glenver matchups this week on Friday. The Buffaloes varsity is going to be hosting the Highlanders in Floyd County.
Yeah, like as I always say every week, it's going to be a busy week. Kind of wrapping up the regular season for football, getting started with middle school basketball, which, speaking of basketball, we kind of mentioned it during the broadcast on the game tonight. Our basketball coverage here on CCTV Channel 20 for Carroll County and Floyd County begins on December 2nd, where the Lady Buffs JV and varsity girls basketball teams will be taking on the Blacksburg Bruins here on CCTV Channel 20 and NFHS, of course. Definitely going to be an exciting time once basketball gets started, but we, of course, got to get football season finished up first. We'll be talking about the final week of the regular season this time next week. Tune in for Citizen Sports Talk next week, but as of right now, I'm Jacob Smith.
Caden Reinhard.
And you're watching Citizen Sports Talk. Have a great rest of your weekend, ladies and gentlemen.